Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. I'm so glad you're here. And what I'm doing right here is opening a package of fabric. I was so excited to get this. This is from a Black-owned business. The company is called House of Mami Wada. It's an African print fabric company. And this fabric pattern is called Bogolanfini. And I picked this one because it's a heavyweight fabric. And I need a heavyweight fabric for my project today. So I'm going to include a link to this fabric at the House of Mami Wada in the description in case you want to browse their fabrics or maybe even purchase this one. Now I'm going to make a tote bag. I need a new tote bag for work. And this tote bag is based on the DIY tote bag tutorial and free sewing pattern for beginners from DIY Today's Sewing and Embroidery. That's the channel. And I'll include a link to that video in the description because that is just a great video. My tote bag is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to make mine out of 2 different fabrics, so that's going to make the straps a little bit different. And I am also going to include a zipper pocket in the lining. And I'm also going to include something that I saw in an LL Bean tote bag. The LL Bean boat and tote zip top has a top to it that zips, just like the name, and I thought that would be a great idea for me for work because quite often I am walking into work in the rain, and so I would love to have a zip top to the tote bag to protect any electronics and books that I might have in my bag. So to start, I will cut the fabric for the outside top of the bag. And I'm going to use the House of Mami Wada fabric for the main part of the bag, the top of the bag. So following along with the pattern, I'm going to cut 2 pieces from this fabric that are 18 inches long by 10 inches tall. Now, this fabric has a pattern, and I do want the pattern to line up around the bag. So I need to cut 2 pieces. One's going to be the front, one's going to be the back, but they're going to meet where there's a seam. So I want them to match up. I also want to pick a nice spot in the pattern for the top of the bag and for the part where it meets the other fabric at the bottom. So there is going to be a little bit of waste, but I know that I'm going to use this fabric again because I just love it. So I will find uses for the scraps. Now I'm going to cut 2 more pieces from this fabric, and that's the bag straps. I've decided that I want my straps to be a little bit longer than the original pattern. So in the original pattern, you cut 40-inch long by 4.7-inch wide strips of fabric. What I want is 46-inch long, and because I'm going to have 2 different fabrics, they only need to be 2.5 inches tall. But my fabric isn't 46 inches long, so I'm going to need to piece it together. Now, with the straps, you're going to see the middle of the strap, basically, but you're not going to see the 2 ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 2 identical pieces out of the pattern that are as long as my fabric. I think it is a little bit longer than 36 inches, but I can't remember. So let's say it's 36 inches. So I'm going to cut 2 identical strips, so the pattern is exactly the same, that are the length of the fabric, which I think is around 36 inches, but I do think it's a little longer than a yard, by 2.5 inches tall. And those are going to go in the center of the strap, so you will see those. That's why I want them to be identical. But then the other part of the strap that you're not going to see is going to be sewn directly to the bag. I am going to cut some more fabric to go there just so that it's consistently the same thickness. But this final strip, it doesn't need to look like the other strip, so I'm just going to cut another strip which is the same length and 2.5 inches wide, and I will use that to fill in the other 2. Now the other side of the bag strap, the side that is going to contrast with my main fabric, I'm making out of this black fabric that I already have. I didn't have a canvas duck. This is a fabric that I got at Amazon last year when I was making those sports bags that I made, and it's my Becca waterproof canvas marine fabric. So it's very heavy. One thing I found is you have to be careful when you're ironing it because it does melt a little bit. It's 100% polyester. And I think I have a couple of yards of this continuous because I was easily able to cut out my 2.5 inch by 46 inch long strips from this. What we're going to do to assemble the straps is fold the edges in to the center for all of the pieces of fabric and then we will put the black and the patterned fabric together and sew them along the edges. I found it was easiest to do this if I cut a piece of cardboard that was the size, well, half, so 1.25 inches wide, and put that on the fabric. So wet the fabric, put that on the fabric, and then fold the fabric over it, and then iron it with an iron. This is because my cuts weren't perfect. I had to fold the black fabric to cut it, and I didn't cut it perfectly. So it's a little wonky, but I don't want my straps to be wonky. It's really important in sewing that you cut things properly. Well, every step is important, but the cutting step, that's where it all begins. So that's really important. That black fabric is also really hard to iron. So I did the patterned fabric first. And then I basically did the black fabric as I clipped it to the patterned fabric. And you're going to clip those folded sides together so you don't see that. So what I did was I found the center of both of these, and that's where I started clipping. Because remember, the center is what we're going to see. We're not going to see the ends because they're going to be sewed against the bag, but I do need them to have the same thickness. So what I'm going to do is take my third strip of the patterned fabric, which doesn't match, and just attach that to the end, however much I need, to each end of the black fabric. And then I'll trim that and take it and put it at the other end, and then I'll do the same for the other strap. The final piece we're going to need for the front top of each bag is a pocket, and I'm going to cut 6-inch by 7-inch pieces of the black fabric, 2 of them for the pockets, and then fold over 1/4 inch at the top, the 7-inch direction, and then another 1/4 inch. And I'll press that and sew a seam. That's for the top of the pocket. Now we also need to sew our straps. So you're just going to sew very close to the edge all the way down one side and then all the way down the other side. Be careful about your sewing machine tension. I sewed all the way down one strap and then realized that the tension was off on my sewing machine and I had to rip out all of those stitches and do that over. So I needed to increase the tension for these thick canvasy fabrics. Now, to put this together, I found the center. Well, I decided which end of my patterned fabric was going to be up, and I was consistent, both back and front. I'm only mentioning that because that's the kind of thing I would do wrong. I'm getting better. So put your patterned fabric down, find the center of it, and then find the center of the pocket and line up those centers. So you want your pocket centered on the front, and then you're going to attach the handles. So 1 strip per side, start at one side overlapping the pocket and end it at the other side overlapping the other side of the pocket. And I had my straps come down a little bit below the bottom, and I'm just going to trim those off. I also had to put them a little bit closer together than I might normally have done, because when I was ironing one of these pockets, I think the fabric started to tighten up a little bit, and so the top of the pocket isn't as wide as the bottom. So I had to put my straps on a little closer to cover up that part of the pocket that isn't straight anymore. And now you're going to sew the straps to the front of the bag, so just sew down the seams that you already have on the straps. I will say, don't start as close to the top as I did, because you're going to have to fold your straps in for when you attach the lining and stitch along the top. So I would say leave a good 1/2 inch at the top that you haven't sewn. It will get sewn down in the end when you top stitch over the whole top of the bag. But for now, you want to sew that pocket on and sew most of the way up. But again, I'd leave a good 1/2 inch at the top unsewn for each of the straps. So now you'll want to cut the piece of fabric for the bottom of the bag, and that is going to be 18 inches by 13 inches. And now I'm glad I have this really heavy black fabric. This is part of the reason I chose such a heavy fabric, is so that this will be durable. So you want a nice durable fabric for this. It's the same fabric as my strap fabric. And what you're going to do is lay that, if it has a right sides together with your one front of your bag, and sew a seam along the bottom, and then lay it right sides together along the bottom of the other front piece of the bag, and sew the seam along the bottom. And I suppose I should mention I'm really constantly pressing throughout this, so you definitely want to, once you've done that, open it up and press it nice and flat. Now what we're going to do is fold it together, right sides together, match up your straps, match up the top, match up the seam where the two pieces meet, the piece for your bottom and the patterned piece, in my case the black piece and the patterned piece. And we're going to sew straight up each side. Once we've done that, we're going to, I think it's called box the bottom. I could be wrong about that, but we want to have a flat bottom to this. So face the edge where the seam is, the side, towards you, and sort of poke your hand up into that. So you're going to make a little point. And I found it easiest to sort of have that point go from that center seam down to each of the straps, one on each side. So you make a triangle, and I clipped it. Now, what she does in the video that I'm mostly following is she measures across, so where on that triangle she has 5.5 inches, that's where she's going to sew a straight seam. So I marked that with a pencil, did that for each side, and then sewed a straight seam and then clipped off that triangle. So now we're ready to make the lining. Now for the lining, I have some ripstop nylon that I'm going to use. This is, again, also from the bags that I made last summer. So for the lining, you're going to cut a piece, which is 32 inches by 18 inches. Now, as I said, I want to put a pocket, a zipper pocket inside my lining. And I have some zippers that are about, I think they're 12 inches. That's going to be a little bit too long. But that's the zipper that I'm going to use. And for the pocket, I'm also going to use the ripstop nylon. And I'm basically using a piece that was left over from me cutting the other piece and just squaring it off. And this piece is 13 inches by 17 inches. Now I also followed a tutorial for how to put a zipper pocket into a lining, and the channel is called No Trace. And the video is called How to Add a Zipper Pocket to Any Bag, Step-by-Step Tutorial. It is also an excellent tutorial, so I'm going to link that in the description as well. So following that tutorial, I marked 2 inches down on my pocket fabric, and then another ½ inch down from that, and then I also drew a line in between those. So I have a line 2 inches down, 2¼ inches down, and 2½ inches down. And I marked the center horizontally. And then I made triangles. I drew triangles on the ends, so joining up the middle line with the two end lines. I then centered that on the lining for the inside of my tote bag, and I sewed all the way around the rectangle that I had drawn on the pocket. Now this is, I should say, I haven't folded the pocket. This is one layer of the pocket against the lining. And with that all stitched, I then folded that in half so I could snip that line that's in the middle of the box, in the middle of the stitching, and cut along that line until I got to the 2 triangle lines, and then cut those triangle lines as close to the stitching as possible. I then took the pocket and pushed it through the hole, and then I pressed that as flat and smooth as I could. Now that's the hole for my zipper, and as I mentioned, my zipper is a little bit too long for this, so I just cut off the end of the zipper and stitched over, well, I stitched first, stitched over the zipper at the length that it had to be, and then cut off the end of the zipper. And this has plastic teeth, so I just cut it with regular scissors. I then pinned the zipper to the back of the lining and stitched all the way around. The last step for the pocket is to sew the pocket together. So I folded the pocket up and then was careful to stitch all the way around the pocket, not the bottom because it's folded there, without accidentally sewing it to the lining of the bag. Now I have my lining piece but with a pocket in it, and now I can finish sewing the lining. So to do that, I'm just going to fold it in half. Now bear in mind, where the pocket is the wrong side of the lining now. So I'm going to fold the lining in half, right sides together, and stitch up each side, but I'm going to leave an opening for turning. So originally I thought I would leave that opening near the bottom. Then I remembered I'm going to have to box the corners of the bottom, again, if that's the correct term. So the opening really had to be closer to the top of the lining. So I just stitched that all the way on one side and then part way up and then to the top on the other side, leaving an opening for turning. I then boxed the corners of the lining the same way I did for the bag and the same amount, 5.5 inches across that triangle. Now for the final part of this, the zipper top part, I didn't have any kind of tutorial or pattern for this, so I had to kind of figure it out on my own. And I don't know, if you don't like the result, you could do it differently, or maybe you know how to do this and my way is completely wacky. Well, please let me know. This seemed to work and I'm pleased with the results. So first of all, I'm going to cut pieces of fabric that are going to be the part that's zipped together, and I decided to make them a little bit long. So this is actually even longer than the LL Bean pieces. And I think that that's going to be really helpful. Like if I put something in my bag that's tall, I'll still be able to zip this over it, but it might be too tall for you. So what I did was I cut pieces of fabric that are 7 inches, that's the height, so 7 inches tall. And it needs to be the same size as the lining, and the lining is 18 inches. But I wanted the top to be a little bit bigger. So I cut 20-inch by 7-inch pieces of fabric, 2 of them. And then I tapered each side by 1 inch. So the bottom is 18 inches. That should fit perfectly around my bag. But the top is going to be the 20 inches. And what I have is this zipper by the yard. I literally did not have it when I sewed the zipper pocket in the lining. I did this the next day and I had ordered this and it arrived. So I'm going to use some zipper by the yard here. So I have 20 inches is where I'm going to sew it, but I'm going to cut it to 19 inches because I want to have fabric on the ends where I'm going to be sewing the seam. So I'm going to cut that to 19 inches. And then I have one of the little pulls here, and to put the pull on, you just open it up gently a little bit at the top. And then the easiest way to put the pull on is to use the curved side that has basically 2 sides. It has a divider in the middle, and put that onto one side of the teeth and then put the other side of the teeth on and then pull. I actually did a couple of these and I found them quite easy to put together using that method. I'm going to have to put zipper tabs on the end of my zipper, I want to because I want fabric on the end. So I am following my favorite zipper tab tutorial, which is from Notches Sewing, and is called How to Sew Zipper Tab Ends, Easy and Neat Finish Zipper Tabs. The advantage to all these tutorials is they show you the sewing really close up. So if you can't tell what I'm doing, and it might be hard because a lot of the fabric I'm using is black, then I highly recommend these tutorials. So my zipper is 1.25 inches wide, but I can't tell you exactly what size pieces I cut for the zipper tabs because it's very hard for me to sew close to the end of a piece of fabric with my sewing machine. So I actually cut these a little larger than they needed to be so that I would have extra fabric that would make it easier to use my sewing machine. So I'm going to make them, because my zipper is 1.25 inches, it has to be at least 2.5 plus a seam allowance long. So let's say 3 inches long. And then the width, again, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to trim these. So what you do is fold down 1/4 inch along the top, the length, and then fold it in half. So right sides together so that that's on the outside. And then you're going to sew a seam down that. Now, again, this is where mine is a little longer so that I can put it through my sewing machine, but I just marked at 1.25 inches plus 1/16 so that it would be just wide enough for my zipper to fit in. So once you've done that, you're going to open it up, open up the seam, and I pressed it at that point, and then you slide it onto your zipper so that the seam is along the back, and then sew that down onto your zipper, and then when you pull it inside out, you have a nice little tab on the end of your zipper. So I did that for both ends of my zipper. And then I took the long part of the fabric, so remember they're tapered, so the 20-inch part, and centered that on my zipper because my tabs are a little longer than they need to be, and then stitched that down so it's covering the zipper, so it's sort of right side over the zipper. Stitched it down, and I did 2 stitches because I feel like this is probably going to get a lot of wear and tear. And then I did the other side, making sure that I was lining those up really carefully. Once I had both of those stitched on, I pressed it open, and then I top stitched on both sides of the zipper. Then I folded it in half. Now I'm folding my zipper tab in half, or basically folding my zipper in half, but it's just at the end, and sewed a seam up each side. And then I trimmed off the excess zipper tab, and if you turn it right side out, you can see we've got, this is going to be the top for the bag, so it's got the zipper. So now we have the lining and the outside of the bag, and we have this, so we can finish the project. So what you're going to do is take this inside out and put the non-zipper end along the top of our bag. The handles go inside the bag, and again, we want those far enough from the edge that we can sew a nice seam at the top. And line up your seams and clip that all the way around. Well, I clipped it. You might be able to do all of this in one step, but I did it one step at a time. So I clipped that all the way around. Then I took the lining, the actual lining, and put that right side in. And again, I know the right side. It's got my zipper pocket on the inside. Matched up the seams on the ends and clipped that all the way around. And then I just stitched that together, sewed all the way around the bag and stitched that together. Now we can turn it through the hole that we made and clip up that hole for stitching. But because I have the walking foot on my machine and I have my heavy duty thread, for most of this project I used heavy duty thread, but when I was sewing the lining, that ripstop nylon fabric, I just used a regular black thread. So I'm going to top stitch the bag first. So I'm just going to start in a relatively flat place and just go very slowly. One mistake that is the kind of mistake that I make is letting the lining on the inside get bunched up while I'm doing this. So as I went, I was careful to pull that lining down make sure that the top looked nice, and just stitch that all the way around. And once I had top stitched that, then I just continued with the heavy duty thread because I was almost out of it. So I figured, well, we'll finish up the spool. And I sewed the inside of the lining where the opening was. So here's the finished bag. It's got the zipper pocket on the inside. It's got the zipper top, which is quite high. It's got the little pockets on the outside. And it's got this gorgeous fabric from the House of Mamiwata. I would love to know what you think about it. Please tell me in the comments, especially if you see mistakes that I made. I'm really proud of this because I'm just a beginner sewer, really. But most of this stuff lined up and worked pretty well, so I feel like I'm learning. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.